So here comes a new episode of Marketing Behind the Scenes, and today we are very excited because with today's story and today's guest, we are taking you to some different markets and we are giving you some new perspectives on employer branding. So we are introducing you to our guest, Keshia Serage from Quuanu EX as SVP, Global Client Success and founder of Crowns Network. Welcome, Keshia.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you for being our guest today, and we are so excited to start a conversation with you. And we have to start with that standard question. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I am Keshia. Una, it is lovely to be here with you and your audience. I am the founder of Crowns as well as SVP Global Client Success at Quuanu. My work in employer branding is as old as 10 years. I have come from a traditional advertising field, industry, and over time I needed to find a niche that spoke to who I was, and that's always been things to do with connecting people. This is how I fell in love with employer branding. I have worked for multinationals that are very strong in research and understanding talent markets across different countries and cities in the world. And today, based in South Africa, Quuanu is still servicing some of those clients that we've had the privilege of meeting some years ago.
Just before we take our trip to some different markets, and South Africa is one that you're focusing currently the mostly, let's start with employer branding. And I have to ask you directly, did employer branding became a buzzword nowadays?
Absolutely, it has. I think the term itself is so loaded, Una, in that a job post, likened to, for instance, a decade, of organizational structure around organizing the brand reputation. These have almost become all mashed up in all the LinkedIn posts we've seen and all these seminars and talks held about employer brand. It's become something and nothing at the same time. And behind it, I think it's this core question. Why would talented people want to come and work for your company? And more than working, why would they want to stay there and in fact tell others about it? I think that's where perhaps the focus needs to be when it comes to employer branding. But also further to that is, if it is not so there's no precision, let's say, with understanding what employer brand is or it ought to be, there tends to be the misuse of budgets and not directing it to places where they really are going to be most effective and create the impact that's needed to deliver on the business imperative. It becomes chasing the next buzz and what other companies are doing on the market, and therefore just wanting to copy that because that's what's trendy at the moment. So that is, I would say, the take I have on it having become a buzzword. Absolutely. So great. And now I think you open for a lot of questions now that I actually want to ask you upon what you shared at this moment. So let me start. Let the first question be the follow-up question be, do you think that nowadays there is some course making equation between hiring posts and employer branding? Because I think that employer branding became so much buzzword that people currently don't truly understand what employer branding strategy or platform is. What do you think about that? Absolutely. And I think there's somewhat something to be said about how it's contextualized, especially in the structure of the organization. When employer brand is viewed as a communication exercise and not so much a talent operation system, this disconnect starts to come through because the focus goes to campaign-driven initiatives that don't have that long-lasting impact, versus if it was to be looked at as a system that we use to attract the best talent, and more than attract, to have them stay, because that informs what it is you need to be doing. If you can make that distinction between what employer branding is supposed to deliver. So absolutely, I think your question is valid and quite relevant for a time like now.
So, and I think that you are using often the term complex talent management challenges. Is that something that it's a moment that you walk us through as the previous you mentioned?
Yeah. It's obvious, I think, to all of us, at least from what we're seeing, the different generations coming into the workplace. And that's one area where I would say the complexity begins to show up. But more than that, we've always had complexity in the workplace, whether it's due to, different generational gaps, the way in which leadership shows up, culture, and also the views that external people have about the organization compared to what the people actually working in the organization are experiencing. So if we're fast forwarding to perhaps the next 4 years, in fact, even if we're looking at it today, as in 2026, is that when you consider Gen Z, for instance, they're delaying entering the work market for reasons that, for instance, a person of my generation, a millennial, wouldn't have rejected a job offer based on those reasons. So the shift not only requires companies to be a lot more in tune with how the market, specifically the talent market, is evolving, but they're also contending with a different layer that talks to how these groups consume information. So one way could be that organizations have been operating on EVPs that have been drafted 4 or 5 years ago when the times were a little bit different to how we're seeing now. And today they're being measured on a different scale to what they're delivering on. So this also maybe goes to the extent to say, when talent these days are looking for jobs, there's a third mediator, not just, what they heard on the street or what their companions have told them about the organization or even information they've gleaned from a career site, but they consult AI models to say, what's it like to actually work from here? And what happens is you've got this accumulation of data sources sitting in this one platform informing a decision of somebody that is, deciding whether or not to work for you. And so that adds an added layer of complexity with how companies need to think around definitely the management, but also how do you attract that type of individual, which we'll maybe address at a later time around even how sourcing is done currently.
Great. And what is your experience and what are your thoughts on how the companies can influence those data that is AI driven by a user? When I want to know more about the company as a potential employer or something.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a shift in the way in which companies perceive talent versus how talent actually perceives companies. In the recent research that I've looked at, for instance, there's this disconnect between what leaders believe as a driver for people to join them versus what the actual talent is saying. So, for instance, they would say things like reskilling and upskilling is a number one driver for attraction, and talent, on the other hand, is saying we're actually looking for tangibles, like, are you going to compensate me well? What does it mean for my stability, my security, financially? So very hard attributes are more important than something else is communicated. So the shift has to begin in the way that organizations view talent and respond adequately to what the market is saying. I think we've passed a time where we want to sit in a boardroom, decide what it is that we think is relevant, and using usually dated insights and data on these talent markets, and then going out communicating who we say we are. However, it does not resonate or land well with talent. So there definitely could be work there that organizations start to do.
And how the organization can step out of their box and start using the proper data? What are those proper data nowadays that will take us where we need to be in like 2 years or 3 years? Because evidently generations are shifting, generations are changing, much, much faster and progressive that we think, while I'm listening to you, how we can match that as a company culture, what data are becoming relevant, where to listen, where to put our attention to.
A very good question, Una, and I think it's a two-pronged response that I want to give. Primary data will always be the source of real insights about your organization and where you actually stand with talent. And then there's the reality of listening in to honestly find what is being said. I think a lot of companies sit on a lot of data that they own, or that, information that they own. People give them around things that do need to change in order to influence the conditions or environment in which they work, which ultimately translate to the employer brand. Now, yes, we can source the data. We can go out to market and ask, what makes us great or what doesn't make us great, and you get that. But ultimately is, what do you do with that? And that's sometimes a very complex question. There could be requirements for very huge structural changes, and at which point some companies are just not in a position to do that. And potentially, this is where we start getting into that risk space where there is a need to say something. There is a need to be seen to be relevant, obviously, but the how the data connects to real life, I think, is something a lot of companies need to pay attention to. And also, obviously, social media listening, those kind of tools. I think there's a lot that's currently going around, Glassdoor and a whole lot of other public sources that sort of give an indication of how a company is perceived. There is a lot of untapped potential there that I feel could be explored.
So now listening what you're saying, like employer branding is becoming 24/7 activity.
Yes.
Because we are living in a modern world with a lot of changes and influence on the people's opinion and mind from different sources, from different platforms. So yeah, I think that employer branding is becoming a more and more important platform. It's advancing from strategy to platform that has to be operative 24/7 if we want to achieve something, and if we want to be in line with the markets we are interested in. And then we have data, of course, the king and the queen of the world, and if we analyze those data and implement those data properly, how then we perceive, how then we communicate towards the market, towards the world, who we are, and what we have to pay attention to, having in mind different talent groups or different markets at the end.
How to communicate. The how, I think, has to go hand in hand with current reality. And I'm going to go back to how social media has democratized pretty much this employer branding space, right? Where a company that's, 10, maybe 20 people strong, if they really, really love working there, they're going to advocate for that. They're going to say it. And the communication somehow moves from, structured leadership and high production costs to say, hey, we're really, really great, to authentic stories of people that actually work there, that love working there. So in today's world, yes, of course, use your entire arsenal as far as that's concerned to put what it is you want to say out there, but also recognize the interplay between employee-generated content and how that actually becomes a lever for trust. It goes beyond the so-called old school way of thinking about a top-down approach, but to a more involved, or let's say candidate and employee-centric approach, which actually, if you do it right, it does open sort of your horizon, and as far as how you can design for their experience when they're coming in, and their onboarding, and pretty much the entire life cycle after they've joined you. So it's not a straightforward, hey, this is how you communicate, you've got the data, you know what you need to say. It's also being sensitive enough to know how the market's shifting, where the priorities are, and what conversations are being had, and prioritizing being a part of those relevant conversations.
So when talking about sharing a word from employees from inside to out, should company take in consideration the market? Meaning that for some wording, some words, one market will be interested in, and with the same words, if I go out to different markets, it won't be heard. So what are those specifics? Let us take the first step into a conversation of the specifics of different markets, maybe South Africa or other that you're focused on.
So, and I've seen this play out so many times where there's one global EVP. This is the promise, and because there is a need to have a unified way to show up in the market, there's the tendency to also think that messages that work in one region will apply in the next. I think for sure this is where data has a critical role, where it reveals, for instance, in South Africa, the market being different for different reasons versus a Nigeria or any other African market. That global EVP needs to be localized, and not, because that's also another buzzword that people use, like localization. What does that actually mean, right?
My question here is, do new generations believe in EVP anymore, like some wording, like a definition of our culture? Like, okay, you're telling me that I'm like this, and I'm like, okay, but what is behind it?
Yes, 100% spot on, Una. And I think that's just the reality of it, is that we've moved from an age where information was scarce, right? We have access to all types of resources these days. So you may say one thing, and in reality, your people are experiencing another. And I think this is also where a lot of the risk sits for the organizations, where they're wanting to drive one narrative, and reality says something else. The ones that have touched you or felt you in some way, those ones ultimately are going to be the ones that are your brand retractors, because you say one thing and you're doing another. And so fueling that way of doing things actually becomes the reason you create that trust gap. So yes, to the question that you're asking around, do young people these days believe in EVP? Who's to say yes and no, I would say, right? There's some parts of EVP that is still very much relevant, but I think it's how that conversation has evolved, that's what we need to be talking about.
Yeah. And
how do you, yeah.
Sorry. Continue.
Go ahead.
So when you're mentioning localization as a form of customization, some terms like EVP, do you think that there is a need of EVP customization regarding entry-level position and senior position? And why I'm asking that, not because of the professional level or experience, but I'm taking this question out of the thought that maybe there is a generation gap between entry-level positions and senior positions currently, that EVP has to be different, because I think that in 15 years ago, entry-level and senior position were within the same generation or something, 15 years or 20 years. But now we have one generation is entering the company, and totally other generation is talking about the culture. What dangers are there?
Yeah. The danger lies in not spending enough time understanding the who you're talking to. So, and you make a valid point. Once upon a time, it was true. The same generation entering entry-level jobs is the same generation at senior level jobs. However, today we see a mixed bag. more than that is, if you consider what would be priorities for a Gen Z individual studying in a workplace, they probably looking for prospects to grow. They want to know that the leadership is sound and things like that. And the leadership bit can cut across the board, but primarily they want to know that they can grow in the organization. And then comes potentially a professional or even someone that is close to retirement. They not looking to grow. So what is it that they are looking for? It could be things around how does the company support me as I transition into my years of retirement. So when you've got a global and not so much localized / customized EVP, and you're just standing on this is who we are, this is what we offer, you run the risk of missing out on groups that may, or in fact you may need, but they don't see themselves in that organization. And this goes down a few layers, especially when it comes down to the actual communication plan for your campaigns or whatever it is that you're going to be doing. But at the core is, if a young person is looking for career, growth, and they're also maybe looking to be able to move, or the so-called mobility, are you able to do that? What structures can I see today that support that you're that organization? The same way that you would speak to a different person. So the triggers for what to say and when to say it are informed by where the talent that you're seeking is at, and you being responsive enough to know from your EVP what it is you need to pull in order to have a sticky message for them or to them.
Yeah, great. Sticky message. I like it. And you said one also great thing, like how Prosper see him or her, see her and himself within a company, how I see myself within a company. What do you think how talent market see themselves within South Africa market or some other markets, how they see themselves? And is there any difference between African markets and European market on that? How they see themselves within a company culture nowadays?
Mm-hmm. A relevant question for our time. I think, we've got all these enablements, tech and the rest, but then there's also a very real question around our economic realities as, these two regions. In South Africa, for instance, we've got very high rates of youth unemployment, more specifically. And I think the old dream that's been sold even to, people of my generation, millennials, of go to school, get the degree, live the dream life type of thing. And we've all tested, it's a lie. It just never got there.
I have to agree. Same pillars of our youth and educational growth, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think over time, that has shifted the way in which talent responds to the marketplace or the employment market. And it shifted in these ways. There's a big rise of entrepreneurship where young people want to work for themselves. And more than that, however, a bit of a nuanced thing is not just, ticking the box of being able to fulfill my needs and provide for myself and my family, but it's also about what impact is this work that I'm doing going to have on sort of the broader community, the broader South Africa, if you may. And it shows the distinction between this generation and that generation. A lot of the younger generation prioritize, the environment, as it were. They want to know that they could work with organizations that care for the same things that they care about.
So I must ask you here. So that's not a myth. That's not a myth. No. Yeah, I also agree with you, because nowadays I think that everybody's saying, come on. That the older generation is saying, okay, guys, go. Let's have a job. Let's take that job and then see how the community effort of that company is going towards. So Okay, thank you for sharing that insight with us that that's not a myth. The importance to the young generations on a community impact that the company having. So, no, it's not a myth.
Yeah. And to address the part about the difference between this market and potentially a European market, naturally the economies also sort of dictate what that looks like, right? Where a different priority might be higher up there in terms of the ranking. For someone in Europe, they could potentially say, I want to know how I integrate my work into my life. I don't know if that's still a thing. I mean, work-life balance used to be a thing, but not so much. It's just a hygiene factor. You either have it or you don't, but it's not an attraction to. But what I am saying is, you have two different talent groups that have completely different experiences and needs on the ground. And naturally, you're going to have to look and sound very different addressing both. And this is the gap between South Africa and a whole lot of other African markets. I mean, South Africa, I guess I could give more context because I'm here, but yes.
Yeah, that's great to get an insight into, so especially for multinational companies having their offices around the continents, so that unified approach, and that term unified that is misused also in a previous period. It's not something that will take to tangible results and sustainable activities. So totally great insights. And I have to ask you something. Can you share with us and remind to us some employer branding effort that failed terribly? Like if we are talking about the market specifics, is there something that someone took an effort, took their time, prepared everything, but maybe said the wrong wording to the wrong audience at the wrong time? Yeah.
Yes. So that, I mean, there are really good examples globally, but I'll also bring it to the local aspect. But maybe 2 points, right? And these link to this need to be radically transparent by organizations. So and I think it's well placed because they're trying to, address the authenticity need. They know that talent on the market wants them to sound authentic and there is a bit of a need to tread carefully there. So I don't know if you were about the Duolingo, for instance, when they were cutting stuff back, right? They went out saying that we've completely handed over that function to AI. Look at us, we did so well. And the market was like, what do you mean? How did you actually handle the people that your machines just cut away? How so the ethical side of it surfaced, and they were trying to be honest. They were trying to show what they did that was, relevant, current, as it were, but it backfired. Another side of it is around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and
also a very, very topic talked about in the previous years.
Yeah, and it remains an interesting one. I think one of the things that I have been seeing is that do we do it, do we not? And especially if you look at multinationals who originate from countries, for instance, that are not pro-DEI initiatives in any way, that still operate here. How do you still show up and show the market that, this is a priority, that these things matter? Because you cannot, in today's world, operate without acknowledging those three things. That, you work in diverse markets. Yes, you've got to also be aware of where people have previously been disadvantaged and therefore find ways to have them included. But then the equity part. And so even further to that, you address things around LGBTQIA+. So many companies, I think, out of not knowing what to do, did something and it didn't quite land or resonate well with the market. It goes back to being in tune with what the talent market that you're talking to actually prioritizes. what you may think is important for you as an organization and where you're trying to go, as real as that may be, may not be particularly relevant or even important to the people that you say you want to attract or even retain, because sometimes the same message that you're putting out there impacts the ones that are here. And when there's that misalignment in values, it starts to show up, and the consequences are pretty clear. You see it in the numbers.
I agree totally. And you mentioned to be authentic, because the word I need your opinion about the following. So usually nowadays everyone say that like because of the social media and digital and everything, everyone can be authentic, and everyone are trying to be authentic. And that's why I will ask you the following and your thoughts on this. Is Generation Z misleading the companies maybe? If everyone is trying to be authentic in some way, having a pink hair, having a tattoos, speaking a certain language, a certain tone of voice, and etc., but maybe in the core they are not the one.
Yeah.
Are they misleading the companies? So then the data are on a ground zero, maybe somewhat wrong. Just a loud thoughts out of this conversation.
I haven't come across any data that supports or sort of refutes this, right? But my own take on this, I think there's a lot of accountability that the Gen Z specifically asks of companies. And so the idea of authenticity is heavily tied to that. So you say you are this. In what ways have you shown up to be that? And can you prove it to me? They are maybe a generation that is over the fluff of what they've been told over years, and definitely aren't convinced by, the lights, the marketing, no. The true test is in how you show up. If you say these things are important to you, do you actually follow through in action? So actual policies that move the needle, the real impact that they get to experience day to day. So companies, respond genuinely to that ask, and certainly some have gotten it wrong and have not gone about it the wrong way. I think the intention was to get it right. However, they may be hopping on it too early, it left them to a bit of risk around how to actually do it. But if we can borrow from what we're seeing on social media itself, if you take podcasts like this and us just having a genuine conversation around what's shifting, what's actually going on, there's more of an inclination to want to hear that out versus some really highly produced scenario where I'm just force feeding you information about what I think is going on. So there is something that companies can learn from, definitely how the Gen Zers are communicating with each other on these platforms, but also find their own voice. So for me, it's that loop once again, is that how the conditions that you've created in the work environment, if they're genuinely what you're saying they are, and they're that good and people are experiencing it, it will emerge from you. You don't necessarily have to be working it, so to speak. It almost becomes a consequence of just how great it is here. So yeah, I think, I don't know if Gen Zers are, let's say, misleading. I think they being genuine in the things that they want, and it's really about how do we get the meeting of minds between what they say they stand for and what organizations claim to stand for. Where do these two worlds authentically meet?
Yeah, and connect, actually.
And connect.
And because we are living in a world that the dynamics that we're living in, is there any preparation for alpha generation? Is it time to start thinking about, I know that they are very, very young, But having that progress is very, very fast, and things are changing on daily basis, and human beings are changing, evolving differently that was evolving the past 10,000 years or so.
Yeah.
So is there any preparation about alpha? Anybody's thinking about alpha, how to deal with them, when to start dealing with them? Because I know there is some very, very different behavioral things and traits between Z and alpha. Just privately, just to mention that.
Yes. There are early talks. I think I don't know if necessarily it's like organizations talking in the direction of, okay, soon we're going to need to hire them. It's more around the same way that Gen Z conversations emerged, right? Before Gen Z, it was the millennials. You know, we were the buzzword of the day, and all these assumptions about what millennials wanted or didn't want. Gen Z came in, and you know, they've shown us a different way. But I think if there's anything to be said about these digitally native Gen Alphas, is that it's a completely different breed of beings. How they consume information, what skills they acquire just from, I don't even know how they do it, if I'm being honest, but I've seen these kids do something, code very early, and I've asked myself as well, like, you know, this is interesting. What is this gonna mean for the future of education itself, right? Given how they are. I mean, it's evident even today with the Gen Z generation, where they're more interested in picking up a skill that they can use, apply here, there, and everywhere, versus, for instance, us that are children of, what are we, millennials. We were taught to get a degree, okay? And we went and got the degree, and we're sitting here with dated information that just is not relevant. So the shift I'm interested or curious about myself is how this incoming generation is going to shape the face of education, but also how organizations are going to need to respond to that. Are we going to still have people submit their CVs, for example, or is it something else? But if anything I have seen today is to go by, I don't know if the way we're operating is still going to be relevant when these ones finally come in.
I don't think so also. Things will again change rapidly. And what I'm interesting, and I think that maybe it will be interesting to our viewers also, is there an example in some phrase and wording exactly that was prepared globally and had a success on one market, but totally different meaning on the other market, like a phrase or EVP or something, or a promise or something that you come up with that is totally wasn't localized enough and thought about it.
Yeah, I definitely, and I don't know how far I can go in mentioning specific, organization names, but there was one particular, is it an FMCG? Yes, definitely an FMCG that had changed its mandate from its sort of American origins and had a different intent, vision for how they're going to proceed just as a whole. And when it came here with the same sort of narrative, this is who we are, this is what we're doing now, and you need to get on board. People just, from the customers down to the talent, I mean, they've had a lot of retrenchments going on because people just stopped buying. And so it was even beyond the EVP conversation. It was really around how a structural change that means something in one market completely failed when it came to another, especially here. I mean, I'm talking about that translation from the American version of what they have. In fact, there's a CVP, and translated to the local markets, they shut down a lot of stores. And definitely lost a lot of people in the same. I'm really wary of mentioning names, but
no, it's not it. But that brings us again to the thought that we are sharing the whole episode. put a thorough thought on your actions, whether our clients or the talent market. Nowadays, we have to be very, very careful because informations are all around us, and newer generations are very well educated and will challenge everything you do, everything you are putting on the table.
Yeah.
So, and with all this that you shared with us, I want to ask you almost like a private question.
Sure.
Because all that you shared is based with a lot of experience, with a lot of information, with a lot of insights within your expertise. Is sharing knowledge and different experiences brought you to what you are now, brought you to this level of passion toward employer branding, meaning that how networking was useful to you growing as a passionate employer branding professional?
Very, very good question. Wow, yeah. When I started in this journey, I thought it was just going to be linear, you know, I'm going to get this role and I will
You will get the diploma and then you will get this role.
Yeah, I was trained that way. This is my whole identity, you know, and I thought it would be that I would get in, be really great in my role, be promoted to the next thing, and that's it. But very quickly, I think, in as much as we're talking about how organizations need to change their approach, need to have new ways of thinking about talent, I've had to do that myself. You know, to say, oh, well, actually, things don't look the same. How do I reinvent myself? How do I come up? And networking has been one of those very, very critical pillars in ensuring that, one, I stay interested in this thing that we're doing. Because I remember a time where employer branding, when it came out, you know, everybody wanted to do it. It was not very well understood, but, you know, everybody was doing it in some kind of way, whatever they interpreted it to be, they've applied it. And I was curious around, one, how sticky will this trend be? And is it something that's going to be, I thought it was a trend then, but that's why I'm referring to it as a trend. It's not now that I know. But, you know, is it something that's going to eventually be absorbed by marketing and sort of fade into the background with everything else? It turned out not to be, because it is a very specialized, okay, maybe I'm making it sound way too scientific, but it is a niche within this, a critical one at that addresses a layer of the business that I would say, in my opinion, is very critical. It's people, because ultimately they have to carry this vision forward. And getting the right people becomes very, very important. So I have leveraged the networks that I've been given through my former employer, for instance. When I started in the space, I thought I was going to go really hardcore and join, you know, the likes of Universal. They're data driven. They collect all this data across different markets. And that was really, really attractive for me. And shortly after that, I've also realized how the conversation was moving, where people are placing their priorities, where creative started becoming, you know, that focal point around how we anchor the way that we look, we feel to people and things like that. And now this new reality of authentic stories being told by the people that we're saying we're doing this for. So in that way, learning and being even in conversations like this one with you today is I think one of the ways in which the knowledge sharing, the transfer even of ideas happens, and it's been a really, really big driver of how I've arrived where I am today. It's truly this community.
So I have two questions that comes up to one. What is your message, firstly, to leaders that think that EB should be placed either under the marketing or under the HR? Because I truly believe that this is still a mantra within a lot of companies, saying that EB place is within those two divisions, but as we talked, all this until up is saying its specific role of employer branding. That's one. And what is your message to young people? They're seeking their professional growth with the employer branding. How to acquire a passion? How young professionals to acquire a passion towards employer branding? Not to how to educate them, because I think that this generation very well know how to educate themselves, how to find information, but how to grow passion. So what is the message for leaders that are welcoming new generations of EB professionals, and what your advice for young professionals and their passion for EB?
Yeah. To leaders, I would say, and specifically going back to what you asked, is it a function that needs to sit in marketing, or is it something that needs to sit within HR? The context is very, very important. And I guess it comes down to, what are you trying to achieve? Are you just wanting people to know things about you that you say are true about you, and in that way, maybe it's very well positioned in marketing /comms, but sometimes the risk there could